It was a responsive web application for healthcare providers or doctors. It was a responsive app intended to be used across many different platforms, desktops, tablets, mobile devices, across a variety of browsers as well. My central role with that project was with quality assurance and specifically test automation. The application itself was built in Vue for the front end and in a AWS Express stack. And so we built up our testing to support those specific things. Our test automation framework that I made when I started there was a pre-existing automation framework, but it really was not serving the needs of the project any longer. And it was even nicknamed Albatross by someone other than me because it was an albatross around their neck. So we put together a much faster, much leaner test framework in JavaScript because that's what Vue is in, and I wanted to be able to support the developers in that way using WebDriver IO and Jasmin, and this allowed us to integrate with our CI/CD pipeline through Jenkins, and because of the project needs to have the app be accessible across many different platforms, we also integrated with BrowserStack, which is a service that allows you to use real devices remotely without having to actually, buy them and have them on hand yourself. So we were able to, on the fly, determine which devices we wanted to test which test cases on, automatically, and it was awesome. And as I said before, we were able to integrate that with our Jenkins pipeline and create quality gates. So when we committed new code, those tests ran automatically, and if they didn't pass, that meant there was a regression and there was something that the developer needed to look into again. And that was slick. It saved us a lot of time. And once that was up and running, we moved right on into creating a backend test framework for API integration testing. And the backend was built, or the unit testing for the backend was already done in Jest. So we used a technology compatible with Jest called Supertest and put together an API testing framework that was automated as well. And we had a lot of success in catching bugs and catching them as early as possible. And it was very friendly both for testers and developers, which was part of our goal. What I typically include in a test plan is specific to what we are testing for at that time. I am a big believer in that regression testing should be done as much as humanly possible with automated testing. So in that case, the test plan is just, run them, right? Otherwise, I am a big proponent of persona-based exploratory testing if you're going to be doing manual testing, meaning that there is specific aspects of the project that you are trying to see if there is anything wrong, who can break something in this thing. So as far as a test plan goes, we would write out, enumerate the various functions and features that we wanted to be paying attention to, and we would document various positive test cases, how things should work, and then how things should fail, error messaging, those kinds of things, how those should be popping up. And then we'd also try to make sure we had as many people on different platforms as we could. So, we would have one person on Chrome, one person on Firefox, one person on IE11, and hopefully mobile devices, things like that too. Just really be in there, try to break it, and that way we can cover as much ground as possible using that one plan. Simply put, the cost of finding defects in an agile project can be reduced simply by how early you find it. The earlier you find your defects and you can document it and address it, the lower the cost will be. I mean, if a user finds it and it's a big problem, obviously that's going to affect you or cost you a lot more. So you want to be getting it as soon as possible. And the way you do that, of course, is that you are thinking about testing and about quality right from the get-go. When you are planning a story or a feature, the feature is not like you have not finished your user story until you've also included how are we going to test this? How are we going to make sure that it works? And what is the test plan for that feature going to be? And then how do we automate it as soon as possible? I'm a firm believer that you don't commit that code with your new feature in it unless there is an automated test for that already, like unit tests and integration tests as necessary. Um, yeah, I mean, you want to catch it as early as possible, which means you want to be testing that code as early as possible in whichever layer is you know whichever layer is the most becoming of that feature. Probably not the best word, but that's all that came to mind. I'm a firm believer that all members of a development team should be part of the code review process. Not necessarily every single person looks at every piece of code, but that every person should be able to be doing code reviews. And if it is a person who is more of a QA kind of person who doesn't understand the various technologies or whatever, then the person who wrote it or even a third party should be there with them to explain it to them, because the logic of what is happening is universal, right? It's just the syntax and the code that they may not understand. So in my last project, yes, I was part of the effort for code review. And when it came specifically to automation tests or automated tests, you you want to check positive cases and you want to check negative cases. You want to make sure that it works the way it's supposed to, and that it doesn't work the way it doesn't, or it doesn't supposed to. It isn't supposed to. Um, most simply put. But then again, the next big question is not just does this test work, but is this the right way to be testing it? Or and by that I mean we just wrote out a Selenium test for it, but could we be covering this with a unit test? Because that's faster. And, automated tests save a ton of time, but they still add up, right? Especially if you're running across multiple platforms. You're running the same test over and over in different platforms, that can add up. So, you want, if it has to be done on the front end with Selenium, okay, but maybe we can do it as a front end unit test. Maybe we can do it as an integration test on the API, actually. Maybe we can do it as a unit test on the back end somewhere. Maybe there's a test, or maybe we can test a bunch of backend processes with one simple action on the front end, like as a login or a migration of some kind. One of my favorite examples of obstacles to automation and how we were able to resolve it is simply with the maintenance of test data and test users. Because when a test automation suite is young, I mean, you always have like these very specific test users that are, they're named Testy McTesterson at gmail.com, whatever. You make sure that no one changes their password or changes their rights or whatever, and then you keep reusing that user. But that doesn't last forever. Like, stuff happens, right? So my so a good example of how we're able to overcome that is that we started putting together automatic test data generators, basically, to create users or to create that test data at the beginning of the test itself. So that way we only created what we needed when we needed it and nothing else. And then there was nothing else that had to be, remembered or maintained. So, if we're doing a test for creating a new user and then they log in, right? We create that user using some partially randomized data with a UUID on the end, and we run through that test case. And if it passes, that's great. And if it fails, then we have a unique user with an identifier on it that we can then track through various logging and monitoring and whatever, and see where the breakdown happened. And then we can set up a service that comes through in a day or two and look for all of the unique identifiers that we generated in that period of time and then delete them. So that way we create things when we need them and then we get rid of them when we don't. I've created a test framework from scratch, and that I have put together a framework using open source libraries that were created by other people, if that makes sense. I have not gone through and created my very own framework, but I have put together, a framework solution for my project and for other projects. In my most recent position, we created one for front-end testing and another one for back-end API testing, and then we were working on a regression or a visual regression testing suite or framework as well. But as far as the process goes, it really depends on what the need for the project is, right? Like, because you want to match code bases, or you want to match the same languages the developers are using, so that way it's more accessible to them. And the most recent time that I did it, it was in JavaScript because it was for a Vue site, and we used WebDriver IO because it could be used. It was very universal. It could be used for many different platforms and translated easily. Not sure translate is the right word, but transferred across. And and we added the things that we needed when we needed them. Like, so we realized, no, we definitely need to add screenshots, right? We need to add reporting. We need to have logging that's really helpful to the developer and to the testers or the other people who are troubleshooting. We need to have reporting for our project people who want to have, a beat on what things failed are most likely to fail, or what are, long-term, passing, what's that word, success rates, there it is, are, that kind of thing. And the same process for backend testing as well. It was they were already using Jest for their unit testing, so we looked for a integration testing framework or technology that would integrate with that. And we ended up using Supertest and another library called Axios, which is just for those HTTP requests, and that worked out great. Then we were able to kind of condense those down into small archives just with those base pieces, and then distribute that to other teams in the company as well. So that way they didn't have to worry about those setup stages. It was already just ready to go, just an npm install, and boom, like they were ready to start writing their own tests. I'm family and married. I have 2 small children. They are absolutely precious and adorable and hilarious. So I love to spend time with them. We like to go places. We like to travel. We love to go into nature. We love to, go on scenic drives. We're talking about small kids. They don't do anything too crazy yet. I also love to read. I've started getting into art recently. Once they started streaming Bob Ross on Netflix and on Twitch, I took up oil painting, and I loved it. Totally recommend it. But there again, with small kids, it's very hard. So I took a step back from that, and I've started doing a lot of drawing and sketching lately. That's been really fun too. In addition to those things, I love to cook, and I love to eat and try new restaurants and new kinds of food. I've always been kind of an adventurous eater. When I was growing up, one of my best friend's parents owned a restaurant, and so that was like a super exciting thing for a kid to be able to have access to a restaurant kitchen and see the different things that they made. And it was very much like a home, like a family run thing. So that was really neat. I'm also, I'm into, programming and automation stuff. So obviously I'm a pretty big nerd. Play plenty of video games, like other fun technology stuff.